Howdy everyone, and welcome to my first lesson. I'm Mr. Lannon, and this is going to be Romeo and Juliet, and with a particular focus on the prologue. So hopefully by now you'll have watched the film, and perhaps you might even know the story, but this is the first thing that you get from the play, which is the prologue. Now, prologue literally means before speech in Latin, so this is the speech that comes before the rest of the play. Now let's get started. So, a prologue then. You might want to think about different prologues that you've seen in films, in TV shows, etc. The three on the right hand side, which you might recognise. One is from the most recent Spider-Man, this one up here. This is from Lord of the Rings, and this from The Lion King. Now, what I'd like you to do first of all is in a second, I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and I want you to answer these two questions. Now, the first question is, write down the definition of a prologue, which is a prologue is a summary of useful information about key events and characters before the story begins. Now, the second thing I want you to do is explain why books and films often have prologues. Okay, pause the clip now and go and do that activity. I'll wait. Okay then, so what you should have hopefully come up with is that a prologue is a useful way of being able to give lots of information to the reader, to the audience, etc. before you've actually started. That way you don't have to then go back with have characters explaining it, go long expository dialogue, etc. It's just there at the beginning for them to use. So Romeo and Juliet has one of these prologues. Not every one of Shakespeare's play has a prologue, but Romeo and Juliet does. Now, here is the prologue in front of you then. Now, I'll read it to you in just a second, but again, I do recommend you pause the video and read it for yourselves. Okay, you ready? Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife, the fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, but with their children's end, naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage, the which, if you with patient ears attends, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. Now, there might be some words in there that are pretty difficult. What you kind of have to remember about Shakespeare is that in order to analyse it, in order to understand it and talk about it, you don't have to be confident with every single line, and you don't have to be confident with every single word. Now, to get the basic gist of it often is good enough, and then your analysis can focus on key phrases, key quotations, etc. But you don't need to understand every single word in Shakespeare. If you were to go through this and pick the words that you actually know, I reckon you'd know about 80-90% of them. There's just certain phrases which you might not, or you don't, that aren't often used, like mutiny and loins and piteous, misadventure, etc. And often, what some people get a little bit lost with sometimes is some of the punctuation as well. Like star-crossed has this little apostrophe. Now let's not get into that just yet, but that's supposed to be about syllable count. Now, you don't need to worry too much. Now, often it's just a verb, and you just pronounce it like normal, marked and crossed. So, I've put at the bottom here a useful link that you might want to use in order for you to get a translation of everything we look at. Now, if you type it into Google, no fear, Romeo and Juliet, could have done with another speech mark there. If you type no fear, Romeo and Juliet into Google, it will come up with a really useful translation of every single scene. Now, often it might make things, it really slows down the process, I suppose. So I will be explaining what actually is being explained in this in just a second. But if you want to use that, feel free to use this link at the bottom. You can just type that in, or just type into Google, no fear, Romeo and Juliet. Okay? So, understanding the prologue then. What I'd like you to do is, I want you to have a look at the prologue and think to yourself, what do you learn about what's happening? What do you learn about the certain characters, the Montagues and the Capulets, which you may be aware of if you've seen the film? Okay. Now, question 2. So what does Shakespeare mean when he says that Romeo and Juliet are star-crossed lovers? And the third one, to look at the line, bury their parents' strife. So strife means problems or arguments. So what does the death of Romeo and Juliet do to the two families? Before you can answer those questions, what I'd like us to look at is each line one by one. Now, when I'm making these videos, I'm not going to do this for every single line. It will take forever. But with the prologue, because of the useful information that's given to you, it'd be really helpful if you just have, for this one, a summary of each line. Now, let's start them. Two households, both alike in dignity. So you've got households, so you've got two families, and they're both alike in dignity, which means they're just as noble, just as important, just as high status as each other. In Fair Verona, you might know that's in Italy, where we lay our scene. Remember, Shakespeare wants you to be aware that you're just watching a play. You're not supposed to treat these characters as real people. Okay, so scene. So Verona is where we're taking place with this play. Okay, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny. So you've got an ancient grudge, an ancient problem between the two families, breaking to a new mutiny, a new fight, as it might be, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Now, civil means polite, means respectful. So civil blood makes civil hands unclean. So you're kind of getting a gist of the violence that's going to take place in the play. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. So loins is probably the key word in this. And if you don't understand the word loins, then you won't understand the rest. Now, loins refers to the sexual organs of a person. So if you read that in that way, from forth the fatal sexual organs of these two foes. So what they're talking about there are the children of these two enemies, the children of these two families. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their lives. So think about the concept of star-crossed. Okay, now the stars crossing is obviously impossible, and in Shakespeare's time they would have treated it like meteorites. So if a meteor goes past, then probably treat that as a star. So if they're crossing, they're showing the unlikelihood of them crossing paths. So a pair of star-crossed lovers take their lives. So we're getting a sense of the suicide there, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows. That's quite a complicated line, but it just means that they've had an adventure, but it's misadventure. So it's an issue that's been brought out by that adventure that they've gone on. Do with their death bury their parents' strife. Now, as the question on the next slide told you, this is a really important line because it tells you that their death causes the end of the problems, the fearful passage of their death-marked love. So we get a sense of their love is there, it exists, but it's death-marked, it's destined to fail. And the continuance of their parents' rage, that was pretty self-explanatory, but it's the idea that the parents' arguments, the parents' anger towards each other, their continuing is making the problems worse, which put their children to end, naught could remove. So nothing could remove this problem except the death of their children, which is quite morbid actually, isn't it? Now, it's now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. Like I said, Shakespeare's reminding us that we are just watching a play, and what we've got here is the 2 hours traffic. Now, this metaphor of 2 hours traffic gives us a sense that there's going to be lots of to and fro and characters crossing the stage, talking to each other, etc. And 2 hours just tells you how long you're going to be watching the play for. Remember, you guys are, I suppose, unlucky in a sense that you're not getting to watch the play, you're just reading it, but you are supposed to absorb it on a stage. The which if you with patient ears attend, so if you're patient and you're listening, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. Our hard work is going to fix what happens, is how Shakespeare kind of ends this sonnet, this little poem at the beginning of his play, this prologue. Now, so these 3 questions are the ones I want you to answer them. You can read those for yourselves, pause the video in just a second and answer those questions in full sentences, please. Okay? I'll let you guys do that. Pause the video. Okay, let's move on then. Now, the next thing I want you to do, so exam boards, they definitely don't want you to just go through and spot metaphors, etc. as they are, as you are analysing, but it is useful to find those metaphors just as a point of practice. You won't get into the higher bands unless you actually do point out these language features. So they don't want you to focus your entire argument on language features, but they do need you to identify them. Okay? So I want you to go through each line, and could you find the metaphor the repetition, the metaphor, the metaphor, the metaphor, and the metaphor on those specific lines. Again, pause the video, label them, write them down, do whatever you need to do, and in a second I will give you the answers then. Okay, let's look at line 3 then. So line 3, the metaphor. In fact, I may have given the answer here. So the metaphor, the ancient grudge breaking to new mutiny. Obviously, a grudge can't break new mutiny, etc. So you've got the metaphor there. So you've got this grudge breaking out. It's fighting against the system. It's fighting. It's coming out in the streets, and these people are attacking one another. You've got the repetition of civil. Shakespeare wants us to know that anybody, if they've got a strong enough grudge, then that can that impacts them, that makes them more violent than perhaps their nature would lead them to originally. Line 6, the metaphor is star-crossed lovers. Now, them being star-crossed suggests their fate and them coming together through destiny, etc. Line 8, another metaphor, bury their parents' strife. You've got this sense of death. So Romeo and Juliet have died, but with their death, they have killed the grudge. Line 9, you've got the metaphor here of the fearful passage. You could argue it's a personification as well, as if the passage itself is scared. You've got the death-marked love of that metaphor there as well. So their love is destined to fail, as I mentioned before. Line 12, you have another metaphor, the 2 hours traffic. He refers to everything that happens on the stage as traffic, the busyness of it, I suppose, as if what they're doing is almost like a waste of time. Okay, so as I say, don't always focus your argument on language features, but it is important to be able to point them out as well. Okay, so here is that translation that I mentioned. This is copied from No Fear Shakespeare on the SparkNotes website. You're welcome to read this. You can pause it if you want to. I'm not going to read it out, but this is a nice translation if you want to use it. Okay, next. Now then, digging a little bit deeper then. So if you want to go a bit further with your analysis, obviously being able to label these language features and say what they suggest, etc., is something that we've kind of covered. But finding connections, finding links and themes in that prologue is important as well to get the high marks. Now, if we look at these 3 quotations, you've got the first one, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, the fearful passage of their death-marked love, and but with their children's end, naught could remove. So you've got this sense of fate. So if you look at star-crossed lovers, they believed in the stars. They believed that what they represented, like horoscopes, like some silly people do nowadays. So you have star-crossed lovers, that sense of fate, them coming together as if the stars have dictated it themselves. You've got the fearful passage of their death-marked love, this idea of being death-marked, as if it was like written down somewhere that they were destined to die. And you've got the passage as well, as if there's no other path to get there. And then we have, but their children's end, naught could remove, nothing could remove. Okay, so it doesn't mention any other options besides the fact that Romeo and Juliet have to die in order for their parents to become better people, to come together, to get rid of all their issues of the past. So there's a clear link here with fate. Remember, that's something that Shakespeare's audience would have definitely believed in, which is the idea that God has dictated it, or destiny has dictated what is going to happen in your life. Okay? Now then, so the last thing I want you to look at then is this question then. So, does knowing that they die at the end ruin the story? Now, some people would argue yes. Some people would argue that maybe it's important to have the information given at the beginning to make things clearer for the people that might not keep up. But I want your opinion. So, why do you believe that it does or doesn't ruin the story by knowing it? Okay. Now, you can have a little bit of an extension if you want to, which is to analyse the prologue. Tell me what Shakespeare is trying to suggest, what Shakespeare is trying to suggest, what Shakespeare is trying to show. But it's also important just to kind of think of it as a structural device. Seeing this at the beginning, it's not necessarily about how it impacts the rest of the story, but seeing how it opens the audience's mind into exactly what's about to happen for the next 2 hours. So, does it ruin the story or doesn't it, and why? Okay? Alright, that's it. Thank you guys.